Hi, my name is Samantha Williams. I will be your student special education teacher this year. I would love to welcome you to our class. I created this video to explain the history before and after the 1970s that applies to special education. I will include court cases that lead up to the laws that came after the 1970s that allow special needs students to attend public schools. I will also discuss court cases that explain the laws surrounding special education and how they are put into action. I will give you resources that will help to explain these laws better. They will also keep you up to date in the advancements in special education. This leads us into our first topic, the history of special education before 1970. History of special education before the 1970s is quite bleak. There was no help from the government, and public schools could deny any child. Parents who had students who had special needs really had no other options than private institutions. That's why our next topic is so important. Court cases that led up to laws such as IDEA were groundbreaking when it came to getting public education for special needs students. Two court cases that we see on this slide is Mills versus the Board of Education of the District of Columbia and Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Citizens versus the Commonwealth. These cases were in 1972 and 71 and really broke the ice for the government to look at other options for individuals with special needs to help them get a proper education. Those court cases led to the EHA, known as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. This was enacted in 1975, which is now known as IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act. IDEA makes it to where every student is able to get an education at a public school. However, there are times when this law is not upheld, and it ends up in the Supreme Court. On the following slide, we have a few cases which have happened in past years where parents have had to advocate for their students on account of schools not giving their students the proper education that they have a right to. Now we're going to look at a few court cases. These court cases seem quite simple, but they have a lot of meaning because the parent and guardians of these students in these cases spoke up because they knew their students were not getting the education that they had a right to. The first case we'll look at is Hendrick Hudson Central School versus Raleigh. This happened in 1982. The student in this case was deaf and needed an interpreter, which seemed like a simple thing, but the school did not want to provide this service to them. The ruling was because of FAPE, which is a free, appropriate public education, the school had to provide an interpreter for the student. In FAPE, it says appropriate education, which means that the student needs to be able to understand the material being taught to them. And without an interpreter, the student would not understand that material. The second case is Florence County School District versus Shannon Carter. This happened in 93. The school in this case was not upholding IDEA, so the parents put the student in the private school so they can get appropriate education that the school that they were attending was not providing. The ruling in this case was the school was actually not upholding IDEA, and they had to pay the student's tuition for the private school. As I said before, these seem very simple, but sometimes parents have to speak up for their children, and I encourage you to do this if you believe your child is not getting the education that they have a right to. On this slide, I'm going to give you some resources that will help you understand the laws that encompass special education. The first one is the Colorado Department of Education website. This website has a portal for parents, guardians, and students who have a child or are themselves in a special education program in the state of Colorado. This website gives contacts, it has a newsletter on it, and it also has a link where disputes and resolutions can be expressed. What this means is if you think your student's not getting the proper education that they have a right to, you can express this. The second resource is the Special Education Toolkit. This resource is extremely helpful when it comes to IDEA, because for those who don't understand this law, they will actually give you an advocate that will explain it to you and explain any questions that you may have about it. The third one is the Center for Parent Information and Resources. This resource explains many of the laws that encompass special education, and one of those laws is IDEA, and it has many more resources for parents, guardians, and students who have a child or also themselves in special education and have questions. On this slide, I have the references that I used to help create this presentation. In this presentation, we've talked about many topics. The history before and after the 1970s, how special education came about, and students with special needs were able to get a free public education. I've brought up court cases to where parents and guardians took a stand for their students when they knew they were not getting the appropriate education in which they had a right to. IDEA and FAPE were brought up. These laws are there to make sure that your student is getting the education that they have a right to. I also gave you some resources to help you expand your knowledge on these laws, and hopefully so that you can become an advocate for your student.